In this video, we are going to look at how to configure IPv4 static and default route. We know routers rely on the routing table to decide how to forward the traffic towards the destination. Router has two ways to build the routing table, either by static route or dynamic routing protocol. To configure a static route in the global configuration mode, we do IP route followed by the destination network and the subnet mask. The static route can be configured with a next hop IP address. So this IP address is not the local router's IP address. It is a neighbor's IP address. So we call it as a next hop IP address. Or the static route can be configured with an exit interface. So that will be the router's exit interface for the traffic to get out of this interface to arrive to its destination. Static route also can be configured with a distance. So we know the concept of administrative distance. By default, static route has an AD1, but we can configure other AD, make it as a floating static route. I will talk about the floating static route in another video. I built a very simple topology. Let's look at how to configure static and default route on this simple topology. Before we configure any network, it's always good to get understanding about the network topology. I have three routers connect to each other. Router 1 has a network 192.168.1.0 network. Router 3 is .3 network, and the connection between router 1 and router 2 belong to network 10.1.12.0 with /30. The connection between router 2 to router 3 is belong to network 10.1.23.0/30. And I also connect a web server to router 2. We use it to represent the IP address on the internet. The router already be configured with interface IP address. We can use show IP interface brief to verify its interface IP address. So has G01 and has S00 be configured. They are in up and up state. And we can check the current routing table by use show IP route. The router already has a two network in its routing table. They are directly connected network. So same for router 2 and router 3. Let's configure static route on router 1. So for router 1, I'll say to reach the network attached to router 3, I need to send the traffic out of interface S00. So the first static route, I'm going to use the exit interface to configure the static route. So config T IP route to reach the remote network. So the network attached to router 3 is considered as a remote network for R1. So the remote network is 192.168.3.0, which has a subnet mask 255.255.255.0. I will use exit interface to configure the static route. We can put the question mark to see what is the option we can use to configure static route. So here the exit interface is a S000. So I put interface S000. Now let's check the routing table by using show IP route again. Except the two directly connected network, now on R1, I also have a static route installed in the routing table. Even it shows as a directly connected network. But when we do the show IP route 192.168.3.0, we can see this directly connected network has an AD1. It actually is a static route. So when we configure the static route with exit interface in the routing table, it will show it as a directly connected through interface at 000. But actually it's a static route which has a distance 1. The AD is 1 for static route. So on R3, I'm going to do the same. On R3, we check the routing table by using show IP route. Then I'm going to do configure the static route IP route. This time is 192.168.1.0 with 255.255.255.0. R3 won't be able to reach the network attached to router 1, so the exit interface is S001. For R3 to reach R1 network, the traffic need to get out interface S001. Now check the routing table. On R3's routing table, now I have static connected network. But at the moment, if we ping from PC1 to PC3, let's see what will happen. So PC1 can ping is a default gateway, which is a router 1's interface IP address. Let's ping PC3's IP address, that is a .3.10. You will see this ping is failed. So router 1 knows to reach our router 3, it needs to send traffic out of interface as 00. So R3 also knows about it, but router 2 has no idea about these two remote network. Let's check router 2's routing table. Show IP route. Router 3 at the moment only know it's a 3 directly connected network. So it has a network connect to its 2 series interface. Besides the network connect to the server, which is on IP address 198.0.0.0. Now to configure R2 routing table, and this time I'm going to use a next hop IP address on R2 as the IP route 192.168.1.0 with subnet mask 255.255.0. Now to reach R1's network, the traffic can get out of interface at 00 or can configure with a next hop IP address. So the next hop IP address is not router 2's interface IP address, need be router 1's interface IP address. That is who it connect to. So that IP address is 10.1.12.1. So that is IP address on R1. So same thing, and I want to configure another static route point to router 3's network. So this network is a 3.0. This time, the next hop IP address is a 23.1. So according to the topology, we change it to 23.1. Now check router 2's routing table by using show IP route. We find on R2 there are two static connected network through its next hop IP address. So we can use show IP route, just check the network about just check 192.168.1.0 network. So that is a static route and has a distance 1. So the AD is 1. To reach that network, the traffic need to send through 10.1.12.1. Now let's go back to the ping from PC1. Last time when we ping PC3's IP address, we can see the ping is failed. Now I send out another ping. We see what's happened this time after we configure static route on R2, and we also have static route on R1 and R3. So we get a reply, but the first two packets get lost. That is because of ARP. Let's send out another ping. You see the ping is successful. So that is a two-way to configure static route, either by the next hop IP address or use an exit interface. Now on our topology, there's another network 198.0.0 network. So my PC1 can ping PC3, which is a network connect to R3. Let's ping from PC1 to router 2's web server's IP address. Ping from PC1 to the web server attached to router 2. So we ping 198.0.0.50, we see we receive the message says the destination host unreachable. The reason for that, look at router 1's routing table. It has a directly connected network. It knows how to reach the network attached to router 3, but has no idea about the web server attached network. We can use the same way like we configured for the network R3, but here I want to configure a default route. So what is the syntax to configure a static default route? So the default route is known as a gateway of last resort. When the router searches routing table, couldn't find out exactly match, and the router is going to send the traffic to its default route. So the default route to configure this IPv4 default route, we use IP route 0.0.0.0, 0.0.0.0, either with the exit interface or the next hop IP address. So on R1, instead to configure a specific static route, and I want to configure a static default route, mean for R1, when the couldn't find out the entry in the routing table, it's going to send the traffic to router 2. Then router 2, we assume this is ISP router, can take the traffic towards to the destination. So on R1, I do IP route. Before we do the static route, let's look at here. This is my full routing table. When I do the show IP route, we can see is that the gateway of last resort is not set, and in the routing table entry, we only have directly connected route and the static route. Now we are going to configure a default route, IP route 0.0.0.0, 0.0.0.0. So the static default route is also known as a code 0 network. I'm going to use the exit interface to configure it as 000. Say anything if I couldn't find in my routing table, I'm going to send out an interface as 000. Now check the routing table again by use show IP route. Now in our routing table, we can see there's another S, and this S has a star, meaning it's a default route, and the network is 0.0.0.0 with the prefix is also 0. So this time we have the gateway of last resort is set up. Now go to PC1. Let's ping the same IP address. We see what will happen. Are we able to ping the IP address on the internet or ping the IP address of the web server? So this time the ping is successful. So the default route is known as a catch-all. So when router searches the routing table, couldn't find out the entry for it, if there's a default route, router is going to use it to send the traffic out. If there's no static route, there's no specific network in the routing table entry, router is going to drop the traffic. So that is for IPv4 static and default route. In another video, I will show you how to configure IPv6 static and default route. Thank you for watching.